Just Business with Steve Thomas and John Worrell. And now, here's your host, Chris Leary.
Hello and welcome to It's Just Business, the show where we talk about the sports media industrial complex and the issues swirling around it. It is Super Bowl week when you are listening to this, and I'm joined by my Super Bowl co-host, Steve. How you doing, Steve?
I can't tell you how glad I am that the Redskins are finally back in another Super Bowl. It's been, 30, over 30 years. It's been kind of a lifelong dream since I was like 20 years old. So it's really excited. It's really exciting to see them go up against the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, amazing. Adrian Peterson still playing well at 63.
You always said I'm good at divorcing myself from reality.
Yeah.
That just might be one of those times. I'm just pretending that my favorite team isn't a complete train wreck.
Well, hey, give them some credit. Have you ever felt, as the fantasy ever felt just a little bit more realistic like it does right now in the last 10 years?
Well, it depends on what kind of fantasy you're talking about. Oh, you mean football? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the fantasy would feel real right now. Something's happened, and that's good, But we've seen change before in this organization. Let's not be completely positive about it, because although it's great that, Riverboat Ron is here and all that, and the Carolina gang is with him, Riverboat Ron and the Carolina gang, maybe that's a name we need to start using. We've seen this before. So part of me is excited, but part of me says, you don't get too thrilled about it, because we know it's going to happen. Because Washington D.C. is a place where professional coaches come to die, and we all know that. Mike Shanahan, dead. Marty Schottenheimer's career, dead. Jay Gruden's career.
He went on to have pretty good years in San Diego after that. Marty Schottenheimer.
Yeah, okay. I mean, no, Marty Schottenheimer didn't, did he?
Yeah. He went to at least one AFC Championship game with the Chargers.
I don't know, but I don't know. I'm excited, but I'm not so naive as to think the Redskins are in the Super Bowl, going to be in the Super Bowl anytime soon. And as a matter of fact, the latest Super Bowl odds I saw just 2 days ago had the Redskins with the biggest odds to get in the Super Bowl for in 2020.
They have a large gulf for sure. I just at least common sense has entered the building. Hopefully, it's baby steps. It's baby steps.
I forget who was number one, but they were at plus 600, and the Redskins were at plus 15,500. Which was 32nd and last.
Well, I'll make a bold statement. I have confidence that Riverboat Ron can move us 5 steps up the odds by this time next year. We'll be the 27th.
I mean, that's realistic.
Odds.
This time that's at least
year.
Realistic. This time next year. Yeah, that is at least realistic.
Take what we get around here.
Yeah. Well, anyway, maybe perhaps enough of that.
We'll bury that pipe dream and move on. Well, it is Super Bowl week, and so we'll start off talking about the Super Bowl and a little bit of the economics of the Super Bowl. Every year that we've had this show, and it has been around the Super Bowl time, we've talked about different versions of this, why they do it, what's the important corporate benefit to the league, et cetera, et cetera. But this time we thought we'd jump into just some kind of facts and figures. So one, the eye-popping number that everyone's always talked about is the price of a Super Bowl ad. And so in 2020, the average cost of a 30-second commercial spot in the Super Bowl broadcast, and we'll call this game broadcast, is $5.6 million. So for 30 seconds of ad time, almost $6 million. And then sure, there's ads that are above $6 million, considering that this is an average number, which is just kind of eye-popping crazy. But there's a estimated 111 million people domestically will watch the show, watch the game. So that's, it's a premium to get that level of eyeballs. One thing that I find just incredible that the price of these 30-second ads just climbs is that now in the YouTube and the internet age, you can watch every single commercial right now. So like before, where there was some excitement, part of the newness, you debut your commercials, you pay a premium, and it would be the first time anyone saw your ad. But now, you can go watch every single one, and the price of the 30-second slot is almost $6 million average, and it goes up year to year. So it is just a orgy of ad dollars, and nothing seems to be slowing that down.
It doesn't. First of all, $6 million for what, a 30-second spot? You said. I mean, that doesn't surprise me. It is the biggest television event of the year. The Super Bowls. I think everybody probably knows now are, generally speaking, the biggest event of the year. They're the biggest events in television history. So the idea of $6 million doesn't surprise me. It does. The second part of what you said, which is that you can watch all the ads online ahead of time, is what really surprises me. Why on earth would you ever let that happen if you were an advertiser you just paid $6 million for? Why are you going to put it on YouTube or whatever ahead of time? That I truly don't understand. It seems to me it kind of ruins the surprise of it all. Put it on YouTube afterwards for sure. I just don't. I don't get it.
Yeah, no, that was. I agree. That was the strange part to me.
Yeah, and first of all, you're going to see the Hogstyes ad on the Super Bowl. We've advertised this network on the Super Bowl. Chris is paying for it, so thank you for that, Chris.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
You're welcome. I tithed it. I tithed it to this great network. So,
but listen, yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, sorry, we're having some technical issues here. That's why it seems a little bit wonky here. But I guess we've been through some of these numbers before. I always say this, I think, every year when we talk about the Super Bowl, which is people need to understand that this is all about money for the NFL, first and foremost. And it's a lot bigger than the game. The NFL is making a lot of money on this thing in other ways, in the form of courting their sponsors for a week. There's all sorts of parties and events and all sorts of things that go on, during Super Bowl week that the average person doesn't know about. The game, I've done it. I've been through this, I guess, once for real, and the game sort of feels like the denouement of the story almost. It's almost irrelevant, to what the NFL is trying to accomplish during the week. It's hard for the public to see that, but it's true. But go ahead, Chris.
No problem. So, yeah, for sure. And it's almost it's almost a sunk cost, right? It's not like the NFL itself makes a ton of money off the Super Bowl directly, but they know it's a deep investment into their long-term strategy and their long game financial goals.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think what the public generally thinks about the Super Bowl is it's all about corporate. It's all about corporate and it's all about rich folks and all that stuff, and it truly is. That is what the Super Bowl is about. It's not about the average fan. Years ago, I don't know if they still do this. Years ago, the NFL, there was a ticket lottery for the average fan, and I used to enter it every year. You had to. I mean, I'm going back, 15 years at least, and you had to mail them a letter or something. It was. I don't think you could even do it on the internet. And they would write you back, write the chosen 5,000 back. That says, congratulations, you can buy a Super Bowl ticket. I never got one, but back then it was the face value was I don't know, $500 or something, which is darn reasonable for a Super Bowl. But all of this is truly just. It truly is just corporate. Chris, did you read the average ticket prices that we've seen this week? Did you go over that?
Yeah, well, I'm about to now.
Okay, go ahead, do that. Yeah.
So first of all, the stated ticket price of a ticket is not actually the interesting data, right? Because the dominance of the secondary market, which really tells you the real value of anything, whether it's a $5 game day ticket at FedEx Field or it's the real cost of a Super Bowl ticket. So right now, using SeatGeek, but they're all going to have basically the same range of prices, StubHub, etc. The cheapest ticket that I'm seeing is $3,500 on SeatGeek. The most expensive ones are about between $7,000 and $8,000. Last year's average secondary market price for a ticket was $5,600. So I would see no reason why this year shouldn't at least equal that or even exceed it. And I'm not doing the hard math, but if my eyes scan and average these SeatGeek prices, that bears out. Your cheapest ones are right at that, high 3,000s, low 4,000s, but then there's tons at 7 and 8. So I'd say the average probably comes out to somewhere around, high 5,000s or around 6,000 for the secondary market.
Maybe it's just me, and maybe it's because I'm fundamentally cheap, which I am. But I don't care. This could be the Redskins' first Super Bowl in 100 years, and I would never pay $5,000 for any form of entertainment ever. There is no 3-hour, 4-hour, half-a-day entertainment event that the world could collectively produce that would make me spend that much money. I mean, just under no circumstances would I ever do that. And that's not even including airfare, hotel, costs, all that other stuff. I guess people live, people on the other side of the tracks live differently than I do. But the beauty of it is that's capitalism. This is capitalism. For all of those of you complaining about it, this is what the market has set. This is what this country's all about. There is an event in which people will buy tickets that cost $5,000. Personally, I think you're crazy for ever doing that, but that is the beauty of the free market. So, the universe has said the Super Bowl is worth this much money. Congratulations, NFL and ticket brokers. Personally, I would just never do that, no matter what. Never. I don't care if I'm Bill Gates. I would never do it. So, would you do it, Chris? If you had that kind of money?
Well, if it's all relative, right? If $5,000 was the same to me as $5 is to the reality of me, then in some ways, why do you care, right? Like if you could get over the moral outrage of it, then, $5,000 to someone at that level of wealth is nothing. It's like spending $5 in the corner store on an iced tea and a pack of gum. So, from that standpoint, if I had it, why would you care? It's not that big a deal, unless you had sort of a moral sort of piece around it, and then it doesn't matter how much money you have. If you don't believe something is worth that value, you don't pay. And then, as is well established, my Dionysian nature would say I would never say there isn't something experience that I wouldn't pay top dollar for. So just on philosophy,
I do. I'm saying it.
Yeah. Now, would I do this? No. So I think I would agree with you on this particular case. But let's say even if a magical pair of free tickets dropped in your lap and you needed to go to South Beach to watch this Super Bowl, here is what you're looking at for your average hotel rate in and around the area is $697, which is really seems expensive, but it's really drawn down an average of one that's at 333, which I can't even imagine the quality of that place. So that's bringing it down. To go up at the higher price points, you can get one. This I found. Let me see if I can find it real quick. You can get the most one hotel, the Clevelander South Beach, is charging $1,800 per night for Super Bowl weekend. And this is actually the more eye-popping part of this. That's a 314% increase over the cost of that room the following weekend.
314% increase. That's just awesome, people. That's great.
So, there are plenty of hotels that, there's plenty of hotels that charge that on the average, but they are high-end hotels. I'm guessing that the Clevelander South Beach, if they're at a 300% markup, is not the kind of hotel that one would maybe look to spend premium dollars on a normal weekend.
Yeah, okay, but my experience in my Super Bowl was that the NFL had completely booked up 100% every major hotel in the city. You couldn't, even a year ahead of time, you could not book, the Marriott, because the NFL had booked the entire hotel. And throughout the city. The only hotels you could get are the Cleveland South Beach, hotels. That was the only thing you could get anywhere close to the city during the Super Bowl week. And so I mean, I don't know how much like an apples to apples comparison that is, because they are the only market. For the average fan, the Cleveland or South Beach is the only market. Really and truly, what you'd have to do is find like an Airbnb or like a friend or something. It's just realistically, unless you're willing to, I don't know, come from like Tampa, for example, this year, it's realistically not possible, not feasible to find a real hotel in the city of Miami during Super Bowl week. So that's just the truth of it. One point in time, several years ago, I almost went to this Super Bowl in New York. What was that, 6 or 7 years ago?
Yeah.
Maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I had a friend's apartment set up. That was just the only way to do it. So I don't know how realistic it is to even think you're going to find a hotel at any price.
Yeah, totally. And I'm getting this story from Kevin Sheehan, but this, I'm sure every local sports radio station sends at least one representative to be on Radio Row and to have programming from Super Bowl week, etc. So there's also a long tail of people who need hotels or need rooms, right? And he told a great story about, both the combination of the economics of the locale plus the cheapness of 980. He was talking, tells a great story about like just how far out of town they had to stay. And they're there for professional reasons, right? They're being sent there. And he said it was literally like an hour outside of the area where the Super Bowl was. And it was like the most Fleabag written roadside motel.
Yeah, well, that's because, again, it's not just because of the cheapness of 980, though. It's because there are no hotels, because what the NFL is doing is they're bringing in thousands of corporate sponsor types. And so, number one, they'll book an entire hotel for a team, right? The team is staying these teams will stay in 2 hotels early in the week, different hotels, and then they move them to game day hotels on like Saturday. And so, those hotels are booked. And then you're talking about, the NFL front office people, all of that. And then every corporate sponsor gets thousands and thousands of tickets, thousands and thousands of people. So it's, nobody cares about 980. There's thousands and thousands of media there. The major networks have, I'm sure the major networks are a part of that. Those hotels that I saw the NFL booked, I'm sure some of that went to the major media, I'm sure. So I feel Kevin Sheehan's pain, but in this case, I wouldn't so much blame his employer as just blame the situation, It's a crazy experience. It truly is a crazy. Here's a story, Chris. This is a true story. This was, because they're working on Super Bowls years ahead of time, in case people don't know this. There's a guy at the NFL who is the commander-in-chief of all things Super Bowl. The guy I worked with is now retired, Jim Steig, but there's somebody new now. But so they came to me. This is, again, going back years and years and years now. And a law firm partner came to me and said, the NFL wants to know if they can control commerce in the city of Houston for Super Bowl week. That was how it was phrased to me. See how far we can go to let the NFL control commerce in the city, And the answer, of course, is you can't, because you're not the government. You're the NFL. But they really wanted, what it was getting down to is they wanted to really and truly shut down anything that was in conflict with the NFL. That's how much of an 800-pound gorilla the NFL thinks they are when it comes to Super Bowl. It's just crazy how much money, how important it is to the NFL in terms of their marketing strategy, all of that stuff. It's it's just so much more than let's sit down on Sunday afternoon and watch a football game. They almost don't care about you. It's almost not about that.
Or they're taking you for granted.
The Super Bowl. They're definitely, yeah, absolutely. They're taking you for granted, but they really sort of, I mean, they want the number on the macro level in terms of viewers, but they don't really care if you watch it or not. What they care about is if, like, Coca-Cola's happy. That's what they care about. And I'm making Coca-Cola up, but, I mean, that's what they care about.
All right, so our last little mini data set around the kind of numbers flowing around the Super Bowl is, let's look at gambling. And the increasing legality of sports books and sports betting make this even a little bit more interesting. So, for the last Super Bowl, Rams v. Patriots, one of the most boring football games I've ever watched in my entire life, the legal gambling was about $325 million, which everybody expects that will be eclipsed this year. No one thinks that record will stand. Mostly because the legality of this is increasing, and I'll actually say a thing about that in a second in terms of who and where. And then, but the estimated, and this still shows you the gap between illegal and legal, the estimated, now this is, why it's estimated is because this is mostly illegal, so it's difficult, your local bookies not publishing their numbers on, transparently. But the estimation is about $6 billion of bets were made on Rams and Patriots. And again, they probably will eclipse that, although with the increase of legal betting, maybe that starts to balance. But just look at that. If we just look at last year's numbers as a baseline, look at the discrepancy between the amount of money bet, regardless of how they were made, and then the percentage of that. So that's $6 billion, and then the percentage of that which is done legally, which is only $325 million. So that still shows you that's a big gap between legal and illegal bets.
I wonder if $6 billion was spent on betting for the entire Major League Baseball season combined.
Oh, I would. My guess would be no.
Yeah, I mean that's an insane number, and I mean. $6 billion in illegal betting, meaning offshore, overseas, most likely. I don't know what universe you're capturing. Is that just coming out of the United States? Is that worldwide, or what? That's way more than I ever would have guessed for illegal betting, especially in today's day and world when there's so much legal betting that can be done.
Yeah. And I don't know, I don't know their formula that got to that, so I don't know if they're counting every corner bar that does their Super Bowl boxes or every party like the one that me and my friends do, where we do our own prop bets and have our own box. So I don't know if they, at what level they're counting, So is it do they have a formula that counts the $300 to $400 that may change hands with me and my buddies at our party or not? Who knows? But,
yeah, I don't know, but that's an enormous number, no matter what.
Yeah, it is. And so here's the places in America where you can bet legally on the game, either through retail, which is, walk up, or online or mobile. Indiana, Iowa, New Jersey, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, West Virginia, and Nevada. Retail only, so this is no mobile or web access. And of course, there's all kinds of offshore stuff where anyone can do, but we're just talking about where there's some formal legality around it. So these are the walk-up, the retail, brick and mortar places you can bet on sports. Arkansas, Delaware, Mississippi, New Mexico, and New York. And the states that have pending legislation to do either or both are Illinois, Montana, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Tennessee, Michigan, and Colorado. So there's a look at the state of legal sports betting.
Yeah, I would say I don't really like this because Chris, how I feel about betting. But I would say we fast forward maybe 7 or 8 years, and I'd say you're going to have all 50 states.
Yeah, or close to coverage, or enough sort of like decriminalized where even if they don't have state doesn't officially have stuff on the books, they're not going. You can use the offshore and all of the proxy bets without fear of reprisal.
I heard there's another gambling story in the news, as a matter of fact.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, the other gambler here is Dan Schneider is getting involved in it. Have you heard about this, Chris?
I did.
Yeah, so the story here is that obviously, we know that the Washington Redskins are trying to rebuild a stadium. We went over this in several months ago when Rick Schneider was on the show talking about it. The FedEx Field lease expires in 2026. Up until recently, in the past year or so, we all thought that for the state of Virginia was going to be the site of the new stadium. That's kind of fallen by the wayside for a variety of reasons. The news that has come out just this past week is that Dan Snyder was personally lobbying the Maryland legislature for the state of Maryland to issue him a gambling license for the FedEx Field site, with the idea here being that, hey, state of Maryland, if you give me a gambling license, I'd be willing to not only keep the stadium in Maryland, but rebuild it on the FedEx Field site at my own cost. That was the proposal that he sent to the state of Maryland, with the undertone of, if you don't, I'm going to go somewhere else. So that's kind of the hidden threat there. But I think it's interesting that sort of the economic calculus of it is that he'd be willing to take the risk at financing the construction, which is going to be, at least $1 billion. If he can have the gambling income. It's just such an important part of everything that goes on in sports now. But that is the latest Dan Snyder Redskins news. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. The state of Maryland didn't see, the news reports from the legislators in the state of Maryland didn't seem like they were all that excited about it, to be quite honest. One of the quotes from one of the legislators was that, hey, most of us are Ravens fans. That was the way they responded. I don't know why the state of Maryland wouldn't jump at the chance of issuing him a gambling license. I don't really get that at all. What does it cost? It costs the state nothing. He's saying he's he's willing to finance the bulk of construction. Why they wouldn't just have it done today, I don't understand. I don't know what would the downside to the state be.
Yeah, no, I don't have an immediate thought about what it would be. Also, it's probably, it's obviously a power leverage play, because he's actively playing DC, Virginia, and Maryland off each other in some capacity, all the time, as he tries to create a market for his team, or, market for his stadium amongst those three players. So it's probably a piece of that. To your point just a few minutes ago, like, in some ways, you just sort of sit and wait because this stuff's coming anyway. But he's obviously trying to push the issue. One interesting thing, it seems to me, is a little bit of a piece of data, a piece of evidence that he's probably starting to resign himself to the fact that he's staying in that Landover locale.
Yeah, part of this, yes, I think that's partly true. When I did my research for my big magnum opus stadium article, I did try to research the title history of that land, and unfortunately I couldn't get online records in the state of Maryland back then. So I couldn't verify this because I couldn't pull the deed to the properties, or deeds, plural, to the properties. Rick Snyder tells me that the deed has, the land reverts back to the county at the end of the lease term. I can't verify that because, again, I couldn't pull the records without being physically there. If that's the case, if that's true, and I don't have a reason to doubt Rick, I'm just saying I couldn't personally verify that. If that's true, then Dan does need the state and the county no matter what, and that may be what it's all about. Because back when the original deal was done back in the mid '90s, which I was a part of at a small level, the county was very involved, because they had to approve the land and everything. So that's part of it. If Rick is right and the land reverts, he needs everybody on his side no matter what, and he can't just bulldoze the property and rebuild on it. So there's that. But I do think there's a leverage play going on. I don't think Dan wants to be in Maryland. And let's face it. I mean, first of all, I say this understanding that up through from 1994 through 1997, 98, I lived about 5 miles from the stadium. So I say this being a former resident of this area. It's a crappy area, okay? Landover Mall, the former Landover Mall, was well known as a huge crime area. It's dangerous. I don't know how successful Dan's going to be if he builds a huge retail, restaurant, mixed use, gambling mecca in the middle of Landover, Maryland. Unless you're really talking about revitalizing the entire area, is that going to be somewhere where that's going to really be a destination? Is that really the best place? I don't think so. I would argue no. And so I really think he would probably want to be in D.C. to do all that, or on the Virginia side. He's kind of lost leverage. Because in case anybody doesn't realize this, I'll say it again real fast. The RFK Stadium site is owned by the federal government and leased to the District of Columbia. The lease expires well prior to the term of any stadium lease. Okay, so the federal government would need to approve a new Redskins stadium, and thus far the federal government has shown no signs that they care a single whit, whether in Congress or in the executive branch, about this. The D.C. City Council and the D.C. Mayor have lobbied Congress about it. Congress couldn't care less about what D.C. thinks about anything, much less a stadium. So that site is extremely unlikely for that reason. There's not a lot of other. You're going to need like 100 acres at least to do this. There's not a lot of 100-acre sites in the District of Columbia anywhere. Realistically, that's a problem. And so, from a land use perspective, Virginia makes far more sense. Especially if the National Harbor area down there in Maryland is out for a variety of reasons, which it seems to be. Dan's really kind of boxed in. If the state of Maryland or the state of Virginia doesn't want him, that's a problem, and so that's why he's back at FedEx Field. I have no doubt that's the last place he wants to be. And what else I'd say about this is that Jack Kent Cooke, who was beloved by everybody, had these same exact problems. Everybody wanted the Redskins, nobody wanted the stadium, and he spent years, literally years, trying to find the Ralph John Maryland land. It took him forever because there's just so many other land use issues that are going on in the Washington D.C. area than in most cities. So it's definitely a leverage play, but it's also a desperation play, I think.
Yeah, and I think to underline your point around he would probably prefer not to be in Maryland, that's also, his fan market is capped there, especially with the Ravens being good for, a good long time now with no sign of slowing down. So, he's got a very hard ceiling. I mean, if you get out of that DC, the Maryland suburbs part of the DC area, you're in Ravens country, as to your legislator point, and that's only growing. That's actually encroaching south, which means there's no movement north. Meanwhile, in Virginia, you got all the way to Norfolk, basically, where you could basically consider your potential fan base. So also, just his fan base market growth is much more open south than it is.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I don't think Dan wants to just surrender Maryland, but realistically, you're exactly right. There's a cap on what he can realistically do. The Ravens have been good, and the Ravens are Maryland's team. So I do think he probably wants to focus on Virginia, and I think he could find 100 acres in Virginia pretty easily somewhere. It's just a matter of money, how much he wants to spend, how much, when you're talking about that big of a development, these guys want tax breaks and help from the state, even if they're financing most of it, because, newsflash, Jack Kent Cooke got like $150 million in help from the state of Maryland and from Prince George's County in the form of tax breaks and other things. So even Jack Kent Cooke didn't build the stadium completely by himself, okay? Ideally, I think Dan would probably want to be in Virginia, but then it's a cost versus benefit thing. I don't know how the state of Virginia feels about gambling. I mean, they've got a completely freak governor right now who's a liberal pinhead. So, I mean, I would assume that Northam probably would be okay with gambling since he's okay with infanticide. Gambling probably isn't, a problem for him. But nonetheless, I mean, there just doesn't seem to have been any movement, at all. And that's Steve's political rant for the day. Sorry, Chris, but had to get that out. So we'll see.
He's by any definition of moderate, but okay.
Did you just say Northam is the definition of moderate? Is that what you just said?
No, I said by any definition he would be classified as a moderate.
That just boggles my mind. Honestly, I love you, Chris. I do. But I think you and I have different definitions of moderate. But let's not go there. Let's not go there because that's.
I'm not saying what my opinion is. I'm saying what the conventional wisdom would classify him as.
Oh, man. But okay. So anyway, to sum it up, like we said, the news is Dan Schneider gambling Maryland. Maryland wasn't too excited about it for unknown reasons. It probably is a matter of time before we start hearing Dan talk about, San Antonio looks good, or somewhere else, somewhere else. I'd make that up, but I mean, somewhere like that. Don't be surprised if it starts to get ugly if we start hearing that, because Dan is a DC guy for sure, but Dan's also a businessman, and he's got a, billion-dollar asset that he wants to maximize. So don't be surprised at some point if he can't get something locked down that he starts threatening to move the team. Whether or not he'd actually do it, don't know.
Hey, I'd be for that as long as we got the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, but even the Cleveland Browns took several years. People need to understand.
They were dark for a couple. I think maybe 3 to 5 years. I think they were dark.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not like this.
Is that how long it took them to reboot the expansion team?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it's not like, for those who are rooting for this, it's not like the NFL is going to turn around and start an expansion team tomorrow. That isn't going to happen.
No, but if the guarantee was in place like it was in Cleveland and the brand records team history, I would accept a couple years of no football. Well, no football.
No local football. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if not being and we need to move on, but I mean, not being a DC resident anymore, I don't know if I would root for the new Washington team unless they were the Redskins again. Because recall what the deal with what happened with the Cleveland Browns is the Cleveland Browns moved to Baltimore. And when that happened, because Cleveland is such a historical NFL city, the NFL said, you can move your team. We can't stop you from doing that, but we're keeping the name and the records in Cleveland. That's what happened. So if the NFL was willing to do that and keep the history of the team in D.C., I could do it. But if there's just like, the Washington Defenders or something or whatever, the Washington Senator football team, I don't know if I could be a fan of that, personally.
All right, well, these are broad hypotheticals, but interesting, and I agree. If it gets more contentious, we will see these kind of conversations will be slightly less hypothetical as that.
He's gonna do it. He's gonna start threatening that at some point. Maybe not now, but at some point.
Oh, I totally agree. Totally agree. All right, so Steve, why don't you give us an update about whether we'll see any football at some point in the near middle future concerning the CBA? Are we headed towards a lockout?
The reason why Chris brings this up is that the current collective bargaining agreement expires in 2020. It expires at the end of the league year of 2020, so a year from March. Okay. The good news is that the NFL and the NFLPA are actually civil right now. They are actually negotiating as we speak. So that's good, because that's a completely different tone than was set back in 2010 when, the NFL just flat out came out and said there's going to be a lockout, period. We're going to do this no matter what. This year that hasn't happened. It's the 100th anniversary of the NFL. The NFL does not want to strike, and it's a 100th anniversary year. They want to sort of proceed on. So it's good that they're talking. Now, there's some major issues. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is I wanted to sort of hit some of the major issues that we can see over the course of negotiations. And so, because it was a Friday night, let's face it, apparently I have nothing better to do on Friday night, I sat down to my handy-dandy 300-page collective bargaining agreement, and I started reading through it to see what effect what's going to happen at the end of 2020. And unlike the previous collective bargaining agreement, there's no provisions for the uncapped year and all that stuff. It just ends. But here's a good point I found. You ready for this? So part of the probably the number one major issue in this collective bargaining agreement negotiation is a split of revenue. So what the current CBA does is it says it defines a pot of revenue. And it includes a lot of stuff and it excludes a lot of stuff. And then it says NFL gets 53%, the players get 47% of what is defined as revenue. You know what's one thing carved out of revenue? This is just the greatest thing ever. Nobody's ever noticed this. And I will cite, what paragraph are we in? Article 12, Section 1, Sub 2, which is non-AR, Sub B. This carves out wholesale merchandising opportunities conducted by Dallas Cowboy Merchandising. So that's carved out. So Dallas Cowboys merchandising, they're defining it as an entity. So that must be Jerry Jones's marketing arm. So they're carving out wholesale manufacturing distribution of merchandising from the Dallas Cowboys out of the definition of revenue. That blew my mind because no other team has that in here. It's just the Dallas Cowboys. That was just amazing to me. But regardless, so number one issue we're going to see here is the line going to move from 53 to 47, number one. Number two, what is going to be counted as revenue and what's not going to be counted as revenue. For example, there is the NFL can give itself credit off of the definition of gross revenue for stadium development. Okay, for example, so they can take a certain amount out of it for stadium. So if the NFL donates $100 million to somebody's stadium, that's going to come off for revenue. So that's a major point because that shrinks the pot, obviously. So I guess I'm not going to go into all the details of this, but the point is to remember this. Number one, where's the line going to be? Is it going to move from 53 to 47, but also what is going to even be included in the pot? So the NFL might give a percentage point or two and move it to say, 59-41, but if at the same time they're going to take out a bunch of things out of the definition of revenue to limit the amount of money they're going to have to pay anyway. So that's number one. By the way, ESPN has a great story on all this. It's called my network's going wonky here. The 9 biggest looming issues in CBA the CBA negotiations. That's the name of the article. It came out recently. Yeah, my internet's just failing. But another big issue is discipline. Historically, the NFL has kept all the disciplinary actions with the commissioner. That's an issue. My guess is the NFLPA will give on that because discipline affects so few players. That's an issue. The drug policy is a major issue with the NFLPA. The potheads want marijuana off of the ban list completely. The NFL wants, has an interest in not having it being viewed as pro-marijuana, so they want to keep it to some extent or another on the list. That's an issue. And then there's a bunch of tertiary issues like practice time and all those things. But I think if they can get past, number one, the revenue split, number two, the drug policy, everything else will probably fall into place, I think.
I think the league will easily bargain away caring about marijuana, especially if it buys them, a couple percentage points or one less thing that's considered revenue or whatever. I fully expect that they will have a NBA-like policy at the end of this.
And the NBA's policy is that it's banned. They just don't test for it, by the way. That's basically where the NBA is.
Right. Which is a face-saving measure, which is why I think it'll look like something.
Yeah, the NFL is a more politically conservative organization, much more politically conservative than the NBA. So while I think I agree with you, there's that I think the NFL owners would pretty much sell their soul to the devil if it got them more money. So you may be right. That may be where they end up. I don't think they're just going to give on that easily because they don't want to be seen as pro-drug. Forget about how you and I feel about it because, you and I have a difference of opinion on it. But put that out the window for a minute. Let's just think about it logically from the NFL's perspective. The NFL does have an interest. The NFL does view themselves as a wholesome family entertainment thing. The reason why the drug policy is in place isn't so much that they really care if there's a bunch of high players. It's that they don't want to be seen as having a bunch of drug addicts or drug users. That it's about the shield and it's about how the league is viewed by the public. And so I think there's a limit to what they will give on the drug policy just for that reason. I don't think it's about player safety. It's not about, anything else, but just how it's viewed and how the view of the public affects the value of the league. So I think that's where they care about the drug policy. So I don't know. They'll give on it to a certain extent, but they're not just going to flat out take it off the schedule of banned substances, I don't think.
It will not be a punishable offense, and
no, I think I think it'll be a punishable offense for sure. They may end up either raising the testing limit a lot or just not testing for it. But I think it'll always be a punishable offense as long as it's against federal law.
So two things. One, yes, maybe at a criminal level, if you get a Leon Lett situation, yes, but they're not. They're gonna the testing for and discipline off. However, they decide to massage that, you'll not be seeing players in programs and potential 4-game suspensions, et cetera, for weed. And the piece I think that your analysis misses there is that. And that the NFL clearly understands is the public sentiment on this is vastly different than it was even in the last CBA negotiation. So this idea that they're going to be somehow on the other side of the public with this is just a fallacy. Literally nothing polls better in America in the most divided time like the legalization of marijuana.
I mean, I totally disagree with you, obviously, on it. I don't think...
Well, you can disagree with me, but that you're disagreeing with the public. I'm saying that the public, the public perception of that has changed radically. So if they had a lax, however they'd slice and dice it, policy on marijuana, they're not going to be outside of the societal movement.
I just don't agree with your view of how society views it. It's definitely changed, and the NFL has recognized this. And to the extent that the NFL can sort of side with what the public feels, they're going to do it for sure. I agree with you there. I don't quite agree that the public is just accepting of this. I don't think that. And the other important part of this is, because I don't want to get into a drug discussion here. This is about the CBA. The other part of this is that I think the NFL won't just wave their hands at something that's against federal law. If the federal law changes, that's another story. But here's the thing: in terms of the CBA negotiations on this, that will happen if the NFLPA is willing to give up money. Okay, it's a bargaining chip. The NFL will give on this to some extent or another, for sure. The line we can talk about how much they'll give. They'll definitely give on it to some extent or another, but the only way they will give is if they get something back, and that's money. And so that will either be a percentage point or it'll be some income that's removed from the definition of revenue. Because that's the NFL owner's number one goals: money, revenue, earnings. And so they'll give on drugs to a certain extent if the NFLPA will give them money. If I were the NFLPA, I'd want the money, not the drugs. But, I mean, that's just me. But that's what's important, and that's where the negotiation points go. And I definitely think those are the two main points. It's the drug policy and it's the definition of revenue. I think those are the two main points that we're going to see on, and it looks like they've made significant progress.
And I totally agree on that last point, and I think part of my calculus and why we'll see some significant relaxation of the policy when it comes to marijuana is because I think the NFLPA will be willing, whether it's just, okay, so, we don't care about luxury boxes or whatever the version of like revenue that gets pulled off the table of share. I think they will give the NFL what they want to get that. So I think there's a willingness for that level of negotiation, which is probably my number one point about why it will happen.
Yeah, and you may be right. I'm not disagreeing with you. I just think it's dumb. Why would the NFLPA want? What is more important than earnings? That's what I don't understand. Why is this so important? Why are drugs so important to the NFLPA over the amount of money that these players can earn? I don't understand that, but I don't. I don't understand why that's so important. I don't know. But if you want to hear some of the stuff that isn't currently revenue, you're talking about what's big, other than obviously what I said, which is Dallas Cowboys merchandising. The PSLs, the PSLs are not included; those are excluded. Stadium revenue from stadium events unrelated to football. Like for example, we got a press release this week from the Redskins that said some K-pop, Korean pop band is coming to FedEx Field, whoever they are, and yeah, that's who it was. Thank you. And those sort of things are not included in revenue because it has nothing to do with the NFL, even though an entity owned by Dan Schneider controls the stadium. Promotional spots received by the NFL under national media contracts solely for its own use to promote NFL football related business. Complement the value of complimentary tickets. There's a whole list of things in here. Luxury boxes used by the NFL or club, or NFL owners. TV. The big one is the TV revenue used to fund stadium construction, as I said. So, I would assume if I were the NFL, I would maybe want luxury box. If you're going to give on drugs, my starting point might be, okay, fine, carve luxury boxes out of the definition of revenue. That might be what I would, if I were negotiating, that might be my starting point with it. But again, my macro point, you're right. I agree with you that that's the point. And I agree with you, the NFL will give to a certain extent. I don't think they'll give as much, but I don't understand why it's so important, the NFLPA. That's what I don't understand. Why is the amount of money all these people can earn for a living more important than the drugs the players can take?
Yeah, we won't agree, and you won't agree with their reasons. And I don't even care to debate it necessarily. I just think it is the case.
You're right. I mean, I agree that it's the case. It just makes no sense to me. Because even, forget about how I feel about drugs, as I'm certainly way out on an edge about all drugs for reasons I'm not going to get into here. But there's some limited subset of NFL players that will choose to pick your drug, right? There's some that will, some that won't. Well, 100% of the players care about earnings, so I don't know why that's not more important. That's all.
Well, I think part of it is, I think one motivator, which is less like, players want to get high, is that, and this is one of the key issues, is the disciplinary power of the league, right? So it does take a whole swath of disciplinary maneuver out of the league's hands. So it's one thing, it does chip away at their disciplinary power if this isn't, or very hard to discipline. So that's a kind of a bargaining type victory there. And you could make the case that, especially if they've got a constituency where this is cared about, then there is a loss of revenue with the suspension, so they want to take that potential off the table.
And now the other point, which I didn't mention before, also is the 17 or 18 game season. That's another big point, and the NFL wants this because obviously a 17 game season means more ticket revenue, and far more importantly means more TV revenue. So the players, this is why I think the players are going to give on this. They talk a good game about this, but at the end of the day, if the players get one more game check, I don't know why they wouldn't do it. Again, they talk a good game now, but if the NFL is willing to not just say your contracts are the same and we're going to, instead of dividing your number by 16, we're now going to divide it by 17, if they tack on another game check entirely to that, which they should, I don't know why the players wouldn't ultimately give on that.
I will be shocked if we still have a 16-game season at the other side of the collective.
I agree with you completely. I think the NFLPA, this whole player safety business, is just a negotiating tactic, and they know it, because ultimately this is a great way to increase revenue, and that's what's most important. And so I think the player safety way is just the player safety argument is just a way for the NFLPA to negotiate a better financial picture for it. That's all it is, I think.
And they'll have some kind of, even if they're cosmetic, offsets against that, which is maybe less preseason games, or it's newer restrictions on the amount of practice time. I mean, there'll be something that kind of cosmetically is bundled with it to look like they care.
Oh yeah, exactly. But you're right. I think so. At the end of this, here's what I think. We'll see. Number one, I think the negotiations are going well. I think they will avoid a strike. I don't know if they're going to get an agreement done before this season, but I think it will be done before the expiration of the current CBA next March. Number one. Number two, I think you will see a greater split of revenue go to the NFL one way or the other. Whether it's through a percentage point or whether it's through the definition of revenue, because I think the NFL will give on drugs to a certain extent. And I do think we're going to see a 17-game season. I think that's what we're going to see, if you look into the crystal ball.
And it's so interesting because you can see where really, the paying fan really takes a beating when these kind of things, because if you look at something like PSLs, which were not a thing before the last CBA, right? But if they can, but you see the NFL be able to define new revenue streams that are outside of revenue sharing, then they crop up. Suddenly PSLs are a thing, which, you know, if you think about it conceptually, is insane. I have the, you know, there's probably a few other examples you could come up with, but it is rare in life that we pay for the privilege to buy something, which is essentially what a PSL is, right? So, like, that's not the norm of commerce. But it was a creative, you know, hats off to whoever thought of that, because it's a creative revenue stream. You know, the how they use luxury boxes was another one. You know, the Dallas marketing, that was probably a buy off to get Jerry Jones to be on the ownership side of agreement. That was a give to him. But you see where, you know, especially with PSLs, you see where you see all that resulted in was another way that fans had to pay.
And the beauty of it is it's a way to make the fans pay and keep the money out of the hands of the players. You know, and so that's
why they got
creative. So that's one way, you know, and it's also a way for the NFL to make more money while simultaneously claiming that they're not raising ticket prices, because they could just as easily, instead of having a PSL, they could just raise the price of tickets by $1,000 a year or whatever the number is and be done with it. But then they'd have to give a percentage of that to the players, and then they'd also have the PR hit of saying, "Oh, they raised ticket prices." So this way, the NFL could say, "We never raised ticket prices this much. You're crazy." And we get to keep all the money. So it's a very cynical thing to do, but it's brilliant. And again, this is the beauty of the free market economy. This is a beauty of capitalism. This is why we're not Bernie Sanders America. It's because, you know, there's people willing to pay those, and you know the market bears that out because there's people willing to pay for it. I wouldn't do it because I'm cheap, but they can do it because the market bears it, and the free market dictates that it's okay.
Well, so we can look forward to some new thing that we don't even know it exists that will exist as a revenue stream post CBA. So we could maybe tweet us your creative guesses of what that might be. And it's interesting. I think yes, the market accepts it now, but season ticket averages, in-game attendance, those things are not, the trends aren't awesome for the NFL there. So, it'll be curious to see what the market will deal with.
And remember that the PSLs are set by the owners, not the NFL. You know, and so, first of all, number one, for those of you Redskins fans out there, I think PSLs are 100% guarantee in whatever new stadium happens. Whether it's wherever it is, there will be PSLs, so get ready for it. But yeah, I mean, I do think there's going to be some creative new way to take your money. You know, I don't know what that is exactly, but there's going to be some creative way to make you pay more money. But yeah, I mean, the attendance is down for certain teams. Not every team, but I definitely think you're right in saying, just sort of as a general construct, the trend line isn't exactly up, you know, for the NFL. And so, yeah, there's a limit. You know, again, the free market says when your trend line is either holding steady or going down, that's not the time to charge more money. So, yeah, I think that's a good point.
Here's my prediction for wacky new revenue stream. We know that second screen experiences, gambling, interaction with the game, we know some stadiums are even experimenting with that. You will pay to log into their Wi-Fi or whatever version of their Wi-Fi comes with added experiences. That will be, and so when you get a seat, you will get upselled, maybe even forced to buy, you know, who knows, some kind of interactive access to content, and then thus the, you know, just the signal itself. Which means they can also say, if you don't buy in, then you get no signal. They can, you know, you can easily turn those things up, down, off, etc. That's my.
How about screens in the seats at the club level to gamble from the seats? You know, you pay $20 and you can have access to the gambling screen right in front of you. You know, Something like that would be a smart thing, kind of like an airplane. Right in front of you, there's a screen. You pay $20 and you can have all the prop bets you want. Yeah, I agree. That's a good one.
All right, so there we go. Do we want to check in into Antonio Brown?
Yeah,
real
let
quick,
me do.
Even though it's not really a business
Yeah, let me
story.
do this real.
Crazy.
Let me
business.
do this super fast. Because we were arguing over Antonio Brown's craziness a couple months ago. The latest thing that happened, obviously, you've seen that he got arrested. In the short version of a long story, is that he and one of his posse were waiting on a moving van to bring his stuff to his house in Hollywood, Florida, and there was a dispute over payment. Dispute being Antonio refused to pay him, and they refused to deliver the goods up front without payment up front, specifically because of his reputation. And so the posse member and Antonio proceeded to allegedly attack this guy, the driver of the truck, and throw rocks at the truck. And then they just took the stuff off the truck from him anyway without paying him. And so the state of Florida arrested posse member immediately, but Antonio locked himself in his house, and so they couldn't get at him without a warrant, which they eventually got. So now Antonio has surrendered himself. But so what he's been charged with, I did look up the Florida criminal statute. He's been charged with burglary and then criminal mischief. The burglary part is the by far the most serious charge. Of criminal mischief isn't a big deal, but the burglary charge is a first-degree felony because it was a burglary with a battery. Okay, because the battery was beating up the guy and throwing rocks at the truck. And so that is a first-degree felony in the state of Virginia, which, guess what? Are you ready for this? Comes with a max life sentence. That's not a mandatory minimum. That's a maximum. That will never happen, ever, 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 ever. He will plea bargain this down to something like a misdemeanor battery charge. They'll send him to anger management school. He'll pay a fine. He'll be on probation. That's probably what's going to happen. But this is the state of Florida playing hard. This is the DA playing hardball because they're tired of him. To charge him like this, to charge him with a first-degree felony for this event, which I agree with his lawyers, it's overcharged. But it's overcharged because they're freaking tired of him, and because he just last week yelled at the cops for another separate event involving his baby mama. And so they're just tired of him. And so they went, okay, you know what? We're going to start off, with the high road and charge you with a first-degree felony. So stay tuned for more stupidity from Antonio Brown. And the last thing on that is that the court did order a mental health evaluation, and that will be done. That will be administered by the court, not by Antonio's people. So we might actually get a real mental health evaluation to see whether this guy is just a jerk or whether he does have some mental issues.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's interesting on a couple fronts. One, we probably didn't cover this, but he was dropped by Drew Rosenhaus, who basically said this guy's got to get his mental life in order, and the mother of his children. I don't know if she's got an official restraining order, but she basically said he will not. Like, she's basically, going through legal mechanisms and just not bringing the kids around him. So probably, arguably the two most important people in his life have basically said we want nothing to do with him until at minimum he gets his mental health in order. So those are two pretty big pieces of data. And can I just say for a second, I already knew he was a good coach, but my hat's off to Mike Tomlin. I mean, this guy squeezed all-star, all pro really production out of this guy, and he was a clown too. I mean, now, yeah, he may be now descending into mental health that he wasn't 2 or 3 years ago, but he was still a clown. He was still a problem. These things were probably all there. It's amazing that Mike Tomlin was able to get this much production out of him at all. Oh,
yeah, amazing. It just goes to show the quality and the strength of the Steelers front office and the Steeler philosophy. And there's a reason why the Steelers have been good for 40 years. And this just goes to show why they have a good coach. They have a good front office. They can deal with nut jobs like Antonio Brown. And the second he causes problems, you are gone, dude. You are gone. If Antonio had been on the Redskins, it would have been a way different scenario. It would cause all sorts of problems. The Steelers just cut bait. Period. And I agree with you. I mean, it goes to show how good a coach Mike Tomlin is for sure. So we'll see. Don't expect Antonio Brown's not going to jail for life. Okay, it's just a negotiating tactic. It sounds sensational. It's just a way for the DA to start off with a strong negotiating point for a plea bargain, mainly because they're just tired of his nonsense. That's the way I view it.
Totally. Yeah, so we'll see. Hopefully he gets, ultimately, hopefully he gets the help he obviously so desperately needs, because this is, going back to August. This is just ludicrous behavior almost on a weekly basis.
Yeah. So stay tuned. We don't want to get into it much more here, but stay tuned.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the close of this episode. Steve, any previews, any updates in the Hogstine Network other than your Super Bowl?
Updates in the Hogstine Network. Yeah. So we are we have transitioned into one show a week for the Redskins, where the day the show's release is going to change here after the Super Bowl, most likely. But go ahead and please check out Rick Schneider's show, Seasons of Discontent, which is his look at all things Washington, D.C. sports and life. And we have written content on a daily basis, so please check that out. And any other podcasting needs can be found on our partner, Big Heads Media.
All right. We will see you in 2 weeks.